Commerce power. What was the last thing that y'all wrote down?
Exchange of goods or crossing state lines. And then there was a big camera.
Okay, there was something that seemed like that was important to say, and I can't think of what it was. So, commerce power, it's important, again, the exchange of goods and services that cross state lines. Can you give me some examples of things that they regulate, the government can regulate?
When it comes to this?
When it comes to the commerce power.
Well, you gave
Produce, give me an example. What do you mean by produce? Potatoes, what do you mean by potatoes? Zoom in on Yanira.
Oh, okay.
You gave an example about Five Guys.
Five Guys.
And
The potatoes come from Idaho. They're always written on the chalkboard. When you buy French fries, something as simple as that involves you in interstate commerce. That means government can regulate. Can you think of anything else that we talked about? Go ahead. Prostitutes, we did talk about. Look at that, zoom in on that smile. Look at that. Wow. We did talk about prostitutes. And if you remember on this, it's a good or a service. So the potato would be an example of the good that crosses state lines. Prostitution would be the example of the service. Anything else you can think of? There are like 5 examples we talked about today.
Oh, weapons?
Weapons. What was that case?
Lopez versus U.S.
U.S. versus Lopez, and this was dealing with the Guns Free School Zone Act. They passed a law that would have stiffer federal penalties if somebody brought a gun into a classroom. How did the court view it? Did they win? Was it lawed? Was it struck down? Can you tell me why? Go ahead.
Because they said that if there were guns, that it would make you not it'd make you not be able to focus and you get bad grades, and then you wouldn't get a good job, and then because of that you wouldn't have enough money, and then that's how it affected.
Yeah, they
So
didn't.
a slippery slope.
They didn't say that the guns were built in another state or assembled, from multiple states. They didn't say something about ammunition. These seem like these would be really easy ways to link it to interstate commerce.
Yeah.
But they said if kids are scared because of guns in schools, then they're not going to learn as much. They're not going to get as good a grades. They're not going to get as good a job. They're not going to earn as much money. And I was stomping the whole time, remember? And then ultimately, they're not going to be, that's going to impact interstate commerce because of that lesser money. That was one of the few examples where it was struck down. So there is no guns free school zone law because they really stretched out that definition. Really stretched out that definition of commerce. Anything else you can think of? French fries, going to the produce, especially in January here in Maryland, because nothing is going to be grown here in Maryland in January. That's going to be interstate commerce. Checking the shelves at Wally World or Target we talked about today. What about the big one? Go ahead.
The Mann Act.
What about the Mann Act?
A man crosses state lines with a woman that had immoral purpose or thoughts can be federally prosecuted.
Yeah, the Mann Act, okay, what was it designed to deal with? Sex trafficking. About 100 years ago, women were getting kidnapped, and basically they were being pimped out. And the federal government passed the Mann Act based on interstate commerce. Now, here's the thing: they didn't say this is based on trafficking. They didn't say this was based on prostitution. But the actual language was, if a man crosses state lines with a woman with immoral purposes in mind, then in fact he can be prosecuted. And they did mean this in terms of men, because remember, women were considered the delicate flowers, and since women were the delicate flowers, then the thought was that they would be led astray by men more than men would ever be led astray. We know way better than that now. But here's the thing, okay, what's the problem for y'all dealing with the Mann Act? What's that?
Like you can willingly cross state lines with somebody that you're dating.
Yeah, that doesn't sound so bad.
Right, so then they could potentially be, I guess, prosecuted for taking you across state lines if you're not married.
Okay, so just because you're not married, if you cross state lines, you can be prosecuted?
No.
Seems like we're missing something.
If you engage.
Like hitting and quitting.
Hitting, zoom in. Okay, I heard somebody just blurt out hitting and quitting. Okay, and this is the thing, and somebody in the 10 o'clock class really dropped the F-bomb on this, but basically, if people hook up unmarried, there would be some folks that would say that that is immoral behavior. And if the law is worded that if a man crosses state lines with a woman with immoral purposes, well, we don't really know what they mean. I mean, does that mean that they're doing something sexual? Does that mean that they're doing something illegal? Does that mean that they're doing drugs? I mean, it really isn't clear. So it wasn't just dealing with the prostitution issue. So in theory today, and everybody had somebody in there that went out of state to a beach, you know, the Rehoboth Pit of Sin, I think it was, in the 10 o'clock class, I can't remember. But the basic idea is this: if you do this, if you know, the guys don't all stay together and the girls don't all stay together, but if this is males and females unmarried and they're hooking up, hitting and quitting, is somehow you've come up with that term. Well, the idea is that you could be prosecuted for that. And do you remember who the guy was that did actually suffer a Mann Act situation? It was Spitzer, Governor Spitzer in New York. He resigned his office. He spent 6 figures on a prostitute in D.C. as governor of New York, and ultimately they said, resign or we're going to come after you with a Mann Act prosecution, and he resigned. Haven't really heard from him in politics since. Go ahead.
How do you spell his name?
Spitzer, S-P-I-T-Z-E-R.
I was so right when I guessed.
Spitzer, yeah. Anybody with anything else? And let me, looking back through here, a couple of these are quickies. Do you remember not the president's call? There was one point that I wanted y'all to get from that. War. Who has the power to declare war?
Congress.
Congress has the power to declare war. People get it wrong every year on the exams. Can't be more clear than that. Can't be more clear than that. The assault on powers. 2 out of the 3 branches in order to get things done in a lasting format. And if you remember in there, it talks about the signing of a law, Congress passes, President signs, getting a warrant, the executive branch needs to make a case to the judiciary, imprisoning somebody, gaining a conviction, executive branch makes a case to the judiciary, or going to war. It's going to be the president and the Congress working together. It's all in the article on this one. It's the 2nd paragraph, and that's all I need is from you to deal with that part of it. Anything else up here that jumps out? Come on, we got to talk about porn in a couple of minutes.
Let's do it now.
Do you remember the porn articles? There were 2 or 3.
Where the women were portraying little sexy schoolgirls, and it was just like, oh my gosh, they're so young. That's
Okay, that's true. But what were they doing that was different in that article than the typical porn? What's that? Photoshop, digital enhancement. So, in fact, you know, typically there's some props, and several of y'all, you know, kind of did the ponytails or the plaid skirt or, you know, these kinds of the lollipop. Anyway, here's the piece on this. The props go away, you're still you. But if it's digitally enhanced, they can really change around the way that you physically look so that you look like you're significantly younger. And was that legal or not? Because remember, when I asked y'all what child porn was, and every single class said it had to involve somebody that was under 18, under the age of consent. There was nobody under the age of consent. But is that still considered why, Diego?
Because she's making herself look like a child.
If somebody would reasonably look at it and think, in fact, that she was a child, and somebody could, then in fact that means that it's not going to be legal. They struck down the ability to do this. So if you wanted to make yourself be, I don't know, let's say that you were a porn star, Jessica, you're 23. Let's say that you wanted to look 15. That's illegal. Let's say that you wanted to look 40. Could you digitally enhance yourself to look 40? No, you can't digitally enhance in either direction. Not in either direction. So understand, there is one child porn that was legal. Do you remember what it was?
anime.
Yeah, zoom in. Anime. And remember on this, somebody would not look at anime and think that it was a real child because it's a cartoon. Whereas if you're digitally remastered, they might look at you and think you were a real child because it's so convincing. Do y'all remember revenge porn?
Yes, exposing people's pictures.
Exposing people's pictures. Yeah, I asked all the classes how many of you or someone you know, and there's a lot of freaks or freaky friends as I try to look at all of you as we go through this. But understand on this, what was it that they wanted? There were two things that you had to prove in California in order to gain a conviction for posting these pictures. Do you remember what they were? Emotional distress was the big one. You had to prove, A, that the person actually posted it, which you can do, but B, you had to prove that this would, in fact, cause emotional distress. And that's harder to do. Do you remember what kinds of information they posted about these women when their pictures were posted online? Address, name, phone number,
and where they
email,
work.
place of employment. I mean, you could track these folks down ultimately, and maybe not the full address, but you could track them down enough by the idea of this information, and I would think that somebody would be pretty freaked out if somebody saw their picture online. The other thing I had asked y'all was, if you were hiring somebody, would you want so-and-so to be caring for your child, for example, if you looked them up and you found naked pictures? And many of y'all tried to say that it was okay, but a number of y'all just had looks on your face like, no, I can't do that. That demonstrates really, really bad judgment. And these pictures would follow you around. That's part of the reason why California was doing this. Looking and just hustling now, because I know that we're coming up on time. Going back to chapter 1 and just hitting these articles right quick. There were several that were in there. The Catholic school teacher article, that's a really good one, and it is, that video in there will help you answer short answer questions, and that one. So take a look at that. What do you remember about the New Jersey drawing picture?
The little boy drew the drawing of him shooting little Timmy, and he was like, no, it's a water gun, but they were like, but it's still implying that it's shooting.
What was the policy that New Jersey had?
Strictly
Zero tolerance on guns. And what does zero tolerance mean, Diego?
None at all.
They don't tolerate whatsoever.
They don't tolerate, what do you mean by they don't tolerate whatsoever?
Like seeing a gun, having a gun, talking about a gun, they don't tolerate any of that.
If you actually came in with a real gun, that was a problem. But if you came in with any form of a gun, in fact, even if it was fluorescent orange and a squirt gun, that was zero tolerance. You were going to be immediately punished. In this instance, he didn't bring a rubber band gun. In this instance, he didn't bring a squirt gun. In this instance, he didn't bring any gun at all. He just drew a picture of shooting someone with a gun. And what made that picture so bad? He wrote his name on there, and then he gave it to the person, and ultimately the person's mom got it, and this was viewed as threatening. And some of y'all said this is nothing but just kids being creative. Some of y'all actually said, wait a minute, if my child came home with this, I would find this as threatening, and damn it, somebody needs to do something. Do you remember how he was punished?
He was suspended for a day.
Suspended for a day and counseling. And you remember, and you've already said this, what he said it was? He said it was a squirt gun, but zero tolerance means zero tolerance. What about Starbucks?
The black men were kicked out of Starbucks.
The black men were, was it just that they were kicked out of Starbucks?
They were police escorted.
They were actually detained, I think, for like 8 hours that day. What was it that happened when these guys went into the Starbucks? You remember?
They were waiting
for somebody else.
They
And the
went in
manager
there and
called.
they said that they were waiting on a third person, a business associate, so they didn't order anything. And evidently they asked to use the restroom. They were denied. And when they were denied, did they order anything?
No.
What did they do?
Sat
They just
there.
went and sat down. And so they're sitting in this Starbucks in downtown Philadelphia, not ordering anything, and the manager went out and asked them to leave. And what did they say?
No.
Yeah, they actually refused. And a lot of y'all had said, listen, I go to places like Starbucks all the time, and I don't buy nothing. I just go in there, and it's no big deal. Others of you said, wait a minute, this is my business. And if this is my business, I want the services of the business to be open to people that are actually buying things. The manager called the police, and the police did what?
arrested them.
Detained them for 8 hours, escorted them out. I think it was in handcuffs even.
It was.
The bike cops in Philadelphia, the video is posted on there. Were they ultimately charged with anything?
No.
What did Starbucks do? They did a
Yeah.
bias training. They fired the manager that was involved in this. And understand on this, Starbucks actually closed stores. This was just a few years ago. And they
Yeah.
did it during times when they could make money so that they would avoid what was called implicit bias. And kind of the discussion we had was, if Moonlight walks in, and zoom in on Moonlight right quick, she's the one that's right there. If Moonlight, oh, I gotta do her hair. If Moonlight walks in to a Starbucks, would they do that likely to her? Or if I walked in, and you can, yeah, I mean, are they likely gonna do that to me? Implicit bias says that you have a certain bias because of a person's race, because of a person's appearance, and